Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Angel Muñiz. I'm a science officer at the European Marine Board, and I have the honor to be the moderator of this third Thursday Science Webinar. As you probably know by now, these webinars take place on the first Thursday of every month. And first of all, we would like to have some housekeeping rules. Please make sure that your name is clearly entered. So when you ask a question, you know also how to pronounce your name, and also know who you are. For the questions to the speakers, you can use the Q&A. Also, you can let us know which organization and country you are from. And also, just to let you know that at the end of the speaker's presentation, we will gather all the questions and then we will answer them orally. For technical support, so if suddenly you don't hear anything or you see that the connection has dropped and so on, you can use the chat, which is only visible for the host, and one of my colleagues also will try to solve that problem. Just to let you know also that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the EMB website and also on its YouTube channel. The title of the presentation today is Potential Impacts of Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal on Ocean Oxygen, which of course really links to our most recent Future Science brief on monitoring, reporting and verification of marine carbon dioxide removal, but also to the Future Science brief number 10 on ocean oxygen, the role of the ocean in the oxygen we breathe and the threat of deoxygenation. The speaker of today is Andreas Oschlies, who is a professor of marine biogeochemical modeling at GeoMar at the University of Kiel in Germany, and also who was the co-chair of the EMB working group on ocean oxygen and also member of the EMB working group on marine CDR. So I think it's really fitting that he also talks about both issues. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Andreas.
Yes, thank you very much, Angel, and thank you very much for inviting me to this presentation, to this webinar, where I can present some of our results emerging from these writing groups of the two reports that Angel just mentioned, and also just trying to share my screen here. Also, information for anyone out there. Whenever you are asked to work on some of these reports for European Marine Board, do so. It's one of the most pleasant activities I've ever had, and I think it's an excellent team, and we really enjoyed this. Usually, often reporting or report writing is not so enjoyable, but this was fantastic. And okay, I hope you can see the slides in the right order. And so this is, as you see, it's really a team of effort, and this also even led to a publication in Environmental Research Letters last year. It also involves the Global Ocean Oxygen Network and the UN Decade program, Global Ocean Oxygen Decade, good. That's on the oxygen side. And on the carbon dioxide removal side, we have a research mission, CDR Mare, a major effort in Germany. And also there's a big team behind this, which I now try to compile into a half an hour of presentation. So this report, Ocean Oxygen, that was motivated by rapid changes in ocean oxygen, deoxygenation, but also by this general, often heard notion that half or every second breath comes from the ocean. And this is, as we showed on this report, not quite true. So right now, the ocean and the land and atmosphere, they function as two almost closed cycles, producing a lot of oxygen. And the ocean produces half of the oxygen on the planet, and the land vegetation the other half. But each sphere is basically recycling all the oxygen produced in that sphere. So the ocean consumes all the oxygen that is produced in the ocean on timescales up to decades or even centuries. On longer timescales, so geological timescales, most of the oxygen that we breathe comes from the ocean. It was produced by burial of organic matter in the ocean and by burial or formation of pyrite in the ocean. So overall, 6 out of 7 breaths that we take from the atmosphere comes on these long timescales, geological timescales out of the ocean. And so we really need the ocean on this planet to be able to breathe. But on short timescales, they function independently, and ocean oxygen is primarily right now important for life in the ocean, which of course is under threat. Okay, so this is really the baseline for the first report, the ocean oxygen report. And the second one, then we moved a little bit more into the marine carbon dioxide removal initiatives, which in the end, well, also from the geological past of the planet, were motivated by these anoxic events where a lot of carbon was buried, organic carbon, forming basically a residual oxygen source to the atmosphere. But this carbon burial meant also carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, and that's one of the main mechanisms that regulates climate, and that the ocean as well played a major role in regulating atmospheric CO2 concentrations. And this is one of the motivations today to study efforts or ideas that one could possibly manage the ocean as well to remove CO2, anthropogenic CO2 in that case, from the atmosphere and store it in the ocean. If one wants to do this, of course, this would have to be monitored and verified. And so there's the demand for a proper scientific information. Could this be done? Could we measure? Could we verify any of these efforts? And that's in this report, and also the research gaps and research needs that we still identified. Okay, and you can read it up. There's the QR code here, and it's on the European Marine Board website. So historically, we were surprised about a decade ago that the ocean is losing oxygen pretty rapidly. And this is the first compilation of observations worldwide over the last several decades. And everything that is labeled, marked red on this global ocean map has experienced an oxygen decline in the water column, so vertically integrated here. And this is almost everywhere on the globe. And this was quite a surprise, although scientists and mariners have measured oxygen for more than a century with the same method, Winkler titration usually, very accurate, and it was used as a water mass tracer, but not so much to identify change in the ocean. Now we have identified this as a major ongoing change, always measured, well, mostly measured with the same method, and therefore much more reliable to infer long-term trends like oxygen loss or deoxygenation than we have, for example, for warming, for temperature. For temperature measurements, the methods have changed again and again, particularly in the ocean. And so it's much more difficult to have a reliable historical record. For oxygen, we have this Winkler titration for more than a century. And so this is consistent historical data that has so far maybe been not used as extensively as we should or could use it to infer what is happening on our planet, and particularly in the ocean. From these measurements, a compilation of measurements, we infer that the ocean has lost about 2% of oxygen over the past 50 years, or the period here 1960 to 2010. And if we go then to current CMAP or IPCC type models, those models project more intensification and more rapid decline of oxygen in the ocean, the warmer it gets. So this is now the projections into this over this century for different emission scenarios. And we see the redder emission scenarios, the hotter climates lead to a faster and more extensive oxygen loss in the ocean. So stronger warming induces more severe loss of marine oxygen, according to the models. And we have a problem here, since current models cannot reproduce what we observe in the ocean. Well, we have errors in the observation or in the compilation of observations, the mapping, but right now these are outside of the models are outside of the observational errors. So we seem to have the systematic underestimation of change in the ocean in current and the best models we have. And this is a fundamental scientific problem we have to address. In any case, the models and the likely physical explanations, or the best explanations we have, also let us infer that reduced warming would lead to reduced deoxygenation. So that's another motivation to stop emissions right now and stop warming, because that would also help to stop ocean deoxygenation. Of course, I should mention in coastal areas, it's not only warming, it's also eutrophication, so nutrient input from land or organic wastes that are respired. But in the global ocean, it's primarily warming. And it's primarily also not the solubility effect, but circulation changes in the ocean that explain this drawdown and decline of ocean oxygen. Well, how do we combine this now with efforts to, or thinking about carbon dioxide removal? Well, it's the red marked phrase here. So if we can reduce warming, which of course we should reduce by stopping emissions, but all these emissions we think we cannot avoid, they will have to be compensated by carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere in order to really stop warming. And so stopping warming will help to reduce oxygen loss in the ocean. So there's another motivation to engage in carbon dioxide removal. So it could help keeping more oxygen in the ocean. And that's what we did in this study, combining our knowledge about oxygen loss and the knowledge about carbon dioxide removal in the ocean, and ask the question, does carbon dioxide removal, so as a climate mitigation, really help the ocean oxygen? Or does it also stop ocean deoxygenation or mitigate ocean deoxygenation? And so we investigated a couple of methods that have been proposed. I will talk you through a few of these. Since none of these is implied in the ocean for many good reasons right now, we used model studies, and we used a global Earth system model of intermediate complexities or relatively coarse model. So there are caveats. But it's one of the best tools we have available right now, and one of the most consistent descriptions of our current knowledge we have as well. So we should not ignore it, but we should also be aware that there are probably errors, mistakes, coding bugs, but also possibly and likely conceptual flaws. And since these models cannot explain the current rate of ocean oxygen loss, they underestimate it by a factor 2 to 3. And this is a really critical caveat I have to mention here. And also motivate you to think about it and develop better models, of course, that are better suited to reproduce current observations in oxygen decline. There's also, blue carbon methods, coastal vegetated ecosystems, seagrasses, salt marshes, and mangroves that absorb carbon and are used and right now sold as well as carbon dioxide removal methods, and they do absorb carbon. They produce oxygen, they do photosynthesis. And often when we do the measurements during the day, we see more oxygen in the waters. But there we also have to be aware of the night time of the diel cycle. And that's becoming more and more apparent when some continuous measurements also take measurements at night. These very productive systems, and even, if they are now managed to be more productive, take up more carbon, do more photosynthesis, they often, in some cases, produce so much fresh, new, tasty organic matter during the day that at night, when there's no photosynthesis happening, the respiration of this newly formed organic matter, respiration at night in the dark, can consume all the oxygen. So it can lead even to fish kills, to anoxic events, if we, particularly in warm climates and warm situations, summertime heat waves and so on, when solubility is low. So having more photosynthesis during the day might impose more oxygen stress at night. We have to be aware of that. So we need measurements at night to really be sure that these productive systems do not lead to additional oxygen stresses in the ocean. The other methods I'm now talking you through will all be applied or are thought to be applied in the open ocean. So in the deep water, And that's where we start with. Historically, the first one was ocean iron fertilization, where people studied glacial, interglacial climate changes. And micronutrient iron is still thought to be very important in that. So more dusty glacial atmosphere bring in more iron and lead to fertilization, more carbon drawdown, and therefore stabilization of the colder climate. And the idea here could we use that by artificially adding iron to some areas of the ocean that are currently iron limited. It's mostly the Southern Ocean, to induce algae blooms and hopefully draw down CO2 from the atmosphere. Basically, a similar thing that we think has happened during ice ages by dustier atmospheres. And here are locations where field trials took place more than a decade ago, almost 2 decades now. So there are 13 field trials over the global ocean, most of them in the Southern Ocean, where it scientifically makes most sense if you want to draw down CO2. And you could see them from space even. So algae blooms were induced in every single of these experiments. So there was it was a fertilizer added to the ocean. Some algae could grow faster and created a bloom. What's not so clear is how much carbon was really then removed into deeper waters, away from the atmosphere. How durable is all this? And this is very difficult to measure out in the field if you have a ship for a few weeks. And so here models come into place. And I will show you some results of models to ask and answer these questions more properly. How durable can this be? What are possible side effects on oxygen particularly? Another main success maybe of these experiments was that now we have an international governance system in place here for ocean fertilization and also other marine geoengineering types. The London Convention and Protocol, so a precautionary approach. And this is a much better situation than we have on land, where usually the ground is owned by a state or some private owners, and usually you can do almost whatever you want if you don't do too much harm to your neighbors. So the global governance doesn't exist for land, and that clarity as we have it for the ocean. And so here the ocean actually might play a leading role governing these intended manipulations in order to find climate solutions that we may need. So we should keep an eye on that. Also, if we do not marine but terrestrial carbon dioxide removal, that governance systems can be developed even in these difficult political times. So, and there's some hope as well that this might actually work. Now to the models about durability side effects of ocean iron fertilization. So we ran various simulations, assuming that we have to remove about this 1 gigaton CO2 per year. So that's the typical scale that IPCC says we will need if we want to reach net zero by mid-century, which again is needed to reach our climate goals according to the Paris Agreement. So it's would be a major operation, and we just had these hypothetical large-scale iron fertilization applied to the ocean in our model for also about a century. And on the bottom right, you see a global map, and the green line here is the northern boundary of the iron fertilized region. So everywhere in the Southern Ocean, we fertilize with iron in order to remediate iron limitation of the phytoplankton there and allow more phytoplankton grow. What is shown, the background color here is the total change in oxygen after 100 years of application. So we see in the water column in the Southern Ocean, the ocean loses oxygen because there's more biomass produced, sinking down and respired. And so respiration consumes oxygen. The upper right panel here shows the zonal average of oxygen change due to iron fertilization. And we see in the Southern Ocean on the left of the green bar, the fertilization region, there's a decline in oxygen concentrations by up to 50 micromole in the zonal average, so quite substantial. It's still not going anoxic, but it would have, we think, major implications on most marine life. So it's less oxygen means less oxic scope, so you can't not swim that fast or produce, your metabolism has to react to reduced oxygen concentrations in water. We also see there's an oxygen increase in most of the rest of the ocean because there's not that much productivity happening anymore. And so macronutrients are all used up or more used up in the Southern Ocean. Not that many macronutrients escape to the rest of the ocean. And so productivity goes down a little bit in the rest of the ocean, and oxygen consumption and via respiration also goes down, leading to oxygen increases actually. Globally averaged, what we see is in this figure where we compare the black line, that's our control, business as usual in this case, so high emission scenario into the future. We have a continuous decline, loss of oxygen in the ocean, as the IPCC models also project. If we additionally fertilize the ocean with iron, the green line, that's the green line, it shows an accelerated loss of oxygen in the global ocean. Even though we have a small climate solution, so we remove CO2, about 1 gigaton per year from the atmosphere, store it in the ocean, and a little bit, well, mitigate warming, we find that ocean oxygen is substantially declined by this activity in the model. What is also shown here is the blue dashed line. That's our solution when we achieve the same climate mitigation by reducing emission in the model a little bit further. Not doing iron fertilization, but removing or emitting 1 gigaton carbon or CO2 less per year to achieve the same climate state. So the dashed blue line has the same climate as the control, the black line, but it has a little bit more oxygen because it's a little bit less warm in that model simulation. So less warm means slower warming, slower deoxygenation. And so this is really the climate gain and an oxygen gain in the ocean if we reduce emissions, but if we achieve the same climate state by iron fertilization, not by reducing emissions, but replacing that reduction of emissions by iron fertilization, we have the same climate state, but much less oxygen in the ocean. And so that it does matter what we do to stabilize climate, and it has impacts on the ocean, really. Similar model simulation for macroalgae that has also been proposed. Farming macroalgae, they grow very quickly, have a high carbon to nutrient ratio, but usually much higher than phytoplankton. And so there might also be a huge potential, and there's some naturally occurring macroalgae blooms, or sargassum, for example, which one might think of this could be used as a climate mitigation method as well. So if these are deployed in the surface ocean, do photosynthesis, grow biomass, very carbon-rich biomass, and then sink these to the deep ocean somehow, this could also be a transfer of carbon from the atmosphere into the deep ocean. And here the simulation is done similar for about 100 years. Maximum deployment everywhere where these algae can grow in the model, and achieving about a gigaton per year scale of carbon dioxide removal as well. The deployment regions are shown by the green lines here in the map, but and overall we see an oxygen decline everywhere globally. And in the the zonal map picture on the top right slide, here we see that oxygen is mostly consumed at depth in the ocean, where the macroalgae are sink down to the seafloor, and then they start to be respired. And there's a little oxygen gain, or some oxygen gain, substantial often, in the surface ocean, where macroalgae just sink through. And so they are not respired so much in the near surface layers, where phytoplankton algae are usually, macroalgae are respired. But the macroalgae sink down faster, deeper, and respiration shifts from the near surface layers to the deeper ocean. So deep ecosystems would be hit by additional oxygen stress. More shallower ecosystems may have more oxygen and somehow better conditions. So what does it do to the global mean oxygen inventory? And here on the bottom left panel, we have the same as we did for iron fertilization, control run, business as usual, black line. We see this decline in oxygen, which is already worrying. If we have macroalgae and they all are respired within the century, which is We don't know if everything is respired. Maybe the cellulose will it's more refractory. It might not be all respired as quickly. But if we assume everything is respired, we end with the red curve here. So a huge, much faster loss of oxygen than we had for iron fertilization because of the additional carbon these macroalgae have. The carbon content is higher, but that means also the oxygen demand during respiration is higher. So they remove more CO2 from the atmosphere, bring more carbon into the deep ocean. But if it all is respired, they also consume more oxygen. If we assume that only the soft parts, so the organic Redfield equivalent of the macroalgae is respired, that's the orange curve, partial mineralization. Here we assume all the cellulose-rich material of the macroalgae just stays there forever on the seafloor without being respired, without consuming oxygen. We still have a substantial loss, so acceleration of deoxygenation. And if we assume that we get our act together and achieve the same climate mitigation by reducing emissions, and this is again the blue dashed line. So equivalent climate, identical climate, but reducing emissions without growing macroalgae and sinking macroalgae. We have a climate benefit, less warm climate, and therefore more oxygen, so less severe deoxygenation in our model simulation. So same climate solution, but more oxygen than we have with either of these organic, macroalgae, photosynthetic routes of carbon into the deep ocean. Again, here, reducing emissions is much, much better for marine oxygen, of course, as any of these CDR methods. This changes if macroalgae are grown and harvested, not sunk into the deep ocean. If we harvest macroalgae and use them, for example, for bioenergy on land and then sequester the CO2 in geological storage, we would remove carbon, organic carbon from the ocean, the biomass of the macroalgae. We would also remove nutrients. That's a major side effect, potentially. But we would remove mineralization and oxygen consumption potential. Therefore, no respiration of these macroalgae occurs in the ocean. It also only occurs on land somewhere by burning them, for example, to generate energy. And so the oxygen increases in this case almost everywhere. And so we have a net oxygen gain if macroalgae are grown in the ocean and harvested. That's the yellow line on top here. And this is the first method in this presentation where actually we have a climate benefit. So the CO2 is removed from the atmosphere, and if everything works as assumed in this model, so the macroalgae are harvested and stored safely on land, or the CO2 that is produced by biomass burning is stored safely. There's a net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. And there's less respiration in the ocean. So there's an oxygen gain in the ocean that almost counteracts the oxygen loss, the deoxygenation we have in this model due to global warming. So this could mitigate both climate warming and deoxygenation, if these are only our only metrics that we have to assess things. So both climate, global mean temperature, and global mean oxygen benefit from this method in this model. As I said, a major feedback or major side effect is that nutrients are removed together with the macroalgae, so the ocean becomes less productive, which will, of course, impact ecosystems, will impact food supply, food production. But less productivity in the ocean also means less respiration, and also the oxygen inventory will be enhanced. Many things we will have to keep in mind if we ever have to decide about deploying these or testing these things in practice in the field further. But here is a qualitative difference from iron fertilization and standard macroalgae growing and sinking. Harvesting really does change the nutrient and oxygen inventories of the ocean. but might offer a similar climate benefit as the other methods. Okay, and then, yeah, these were examples, and they are, well, often difficult to compare, and they may depend on the regions where we apply it, on the amplitude of intensity, scale of application. And here now we try to come up with a metric that allows for easier comparison of different marine carbon dioxide removal methods and their impact on marine oxygen. And so on this graph, the vertical axis vertical axis is the change in global ocean oxygen inventory, units here are petamole, compared to pre-industrial. What we see already is that historically we see a decline. So we start pre-industrial here, we go to the right to this corner, or well, site where it's labeled today. That's the historical deoxygenation the ocean has experienced in this model. So an oxygen loss from the ocean inventory due to CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. That's now the axis, the horizontal axis. That's the atmospheric carbon content, or CO2 content measured in petagrams carbon here. So historically, we have emitted CO2. Right now, about 270 petagram carbon added to the atmosphere, and that's the horizontal axis. So if we go, right now we go to the right, emitting CO2, and the black line shows the ocean loses oxygen as a result of this warming, anthropogenic warming, by increasing atmospheric CO2 concentrations. Now, CDR methods try to do the opposite, reduce atmospheric CO2, remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and basically going to the left on this panel. And that's what ocean aerosolization, the green line, and the macroalgae, the red line, do. They go to the left, so they are, in the model at least, very effective in removing carbon. These crosses are annual crosses here, so every year they add about roughly a petagram, or they remove a petagram from the atmosphere. So they go to the left by 1 petagram, roughly. And both of these reduce oxygen inventory because of enhanced respiration in the ocean. So there's a rapid loss of oxygen, rapid compared to the historical change. That was the black line in the upper half of the, or upper quarter of this figure. So we see a huge, pronounced acceleration of oxygen loss by going back, reducing atmospheric CO2 concentration. So we go left, but not even to pre-industrial, but still a substantial amount. So it's significant, it's climate relevant. That's about the order of magnitude we need, according to IPCC, to reach climate neutrality or greenhouse gas neutrality by mid-century. So this is something that is on our agenda. We have to remove about that amount of carbon from the atmosphere. And if we do it via these methods, the model indicates we would lose a lot of oxygen from the ocean. It doesn't say where, so it might still, we don't necessarily increase suboxic or anoxic regions, but overall the inventory is reduced. If we have macroalgae and only partial mineralization, also artificial upwelling attempts, which is the pink curve here, I don't think it's that much on the agenda anymore for many good reasons. These would also be able to remove some CO2 from the ocean, so the lines go to the left again, but they also remove oxygen from the ocean. So still an oxygen debt these methods incur, but some climate benefit they could have as well. If macroalgae are harvested, that was this qualitative change among the different methods. There can be an oxygen gain, or will be an oxygen gain, because there's less respiration in the ocean, and but also less nutrients, a less productive ocean, which means more oxygen, again, because of less respiration. So this also can remove carbon from the atmosphere, so going to left. But here, this is the first method that goes upwards, so it can mitigate historical deoxygenation in the ocean. And then we have these geochemical methods that do not rely on photosynthesis, but rely on acid-base reaction in the ocean, basically putting enhanced alkalinity, enhancing the buffer capacity of the ocean, and thereby removing CO2 from the ocean into bicarbonates and carbonate ions into the ocean. So salts of the carbonic acids are added to the ocean. And these are the blue cyan line here. This is ocean alkalinity enhancement. And this basically shows no direct impact on oxygen as long as it doesn't interfere with biology, which is in the model here, we assume it does not interfere with biology. It's just a chemical process. But we have a slight reduction in warming. That's the climate benefit we have. Reduction in warming means enhanced solubility, so more oxygen can be taken up by the ocean, can be kept in the ocean, and also a less stratified ocean because the warming usually, often always comes from the top. Reduced warming means reduced stratification and not so intense reduction in overturning circulation. So OAE, ocean alkalinity enhancement here, can lead to a small gain in oxygen, mainly because of this reduction in warming. Okay, and here we see, well, that was the global inventory. If we look at the areas of suboxic volumes, here defined as 5 micromolar, less than 5 micromole concentrations, the picture is very different. Here we see the control line, that's the blackish blue line. That's the percent fraction at each depth level. Vertical axis is depth in the ocean. So the global percentage of suboxic area, like at 500 meters, we can here go today in the control, we have about 5%, 2% suboxic area. If iron fertilization is applied, or macroalgae farming, this suboxic area is reduced because it's mostly in the tropical oceans, low latitudes. But these methods remove carbon and have respiration either in the Southern Ocean for ocean iron fertilization or in the deep ocean for macroalgae and sinking. So these methods have at least less respiration in these tropical regions where the suboxic volumes in the current ocean are. And so the suboxic volumes shrink in these models as a result of biotic carbon dioxide removal methods in the ocean. So total oxygen content decreases, as we had on this slide. So they all go to the bottom left corner, these biotic methods. So they lose oxygen, but the suboxic volume shrinks. So that might have very different ecological implications. So there are maybe winners and losers, and it's the pictures, of course, as we all expect, more complicated than just a single number for the total ocean, as we have seen in the first pictures for the global ocean oxygen inventory, as this figure here shows on the right. So we can have, and we will have, different metrics to assess the methods. Do we value suboxic volume larger? Do we value total ocean oxygen content larger? If we value total oxygen content, then it is clear biotic marine CDR methods that include respiration in the ocean lead to additional loss of oxygen in the ocean. They may reduce warming, so they may work in a climate sense, but they will reduce oxygen in the ocean. Abiotic methods, geochemical methods, they are intended to avoid or they try to avoid ecological impacts, so they do not intendedly change photosynthesis. And therefore, they can avoid changes in respiration, and they can avoid also additional deoxygenation. And if they work in a climate sense, they would lead to less warming and therefore less deoxygenation. So they can be beneficial for both climate and total oxygen content. Macroalgae farming and harvesting, so taking out organic matter, avoiding respiration in the ocean, can lead to additional oxygen or less oxygen consumption in the ocean and can even revert ocean deoxygenation. Side effects will be changes or reductions in nutrient inventory and a less productive ocean. In any case, these examples, all based on models, show already that we should measure oxygen whenever we think about deploying marine carbon dioxide removal methods. Oxygen is relatively easy to measure, relatively cheap to measure. It has been done with a pretty good baseline historically. And we would detect also likely if things go wrong pretty well early, maybe not early enough, but earlier than with many other indicators we can measure. So oxygen should be one of the key variables for any marine CDR monitoring efforts. And this is one of the low-hanging fruit messages that whatever you do there, don't forget oxygen. Measure it. We can do it. We have relatively cheap sensors, and it will also enhance our ability to better understand the ongoing change, oxygen loss in the ocean. We will learn more about resilience, about possible tipping points in ocean oxygen. We will understand the system better, but we can also help to avoid starting intentional perturbations to the ocean that may be a major threat to marine ecosystems that, in the current ocean at least, depend heavily on ocean oxygen. So thank you for your attention with that. I look forward to questions. And most of this is written up in this recent paper, so you can have more details if you want to know. Thank you for your attention. And I stop sharing, I think.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And it's really interesting that you were looking at the impact of marine CDR methods on oxygen, and it also really reflects on what we also say in this monitor reporting and verification, that you only have to look at the carbon and also the impact on carbon, but also, what happens with the other variables. So I think it's also really interesting. So as a reminder, you can put your questions on the Q&A. I already see that there is one question and also another question from my colleague that are also related, so I will ask them those in a bit. But maybe first clarification, because also it's interesting for me. You said at the beginning that if we reduce the warming in the ocean, we will reduce the oxygenation. But then my question is, if we are able as society to reduce emissions, will the oxygenation also stopped more or less afterwards, or will be also like sea level rise that you will still see the increasing of the oxygenation up to centuries afterwards? Do you know how would it be, or it will be something that more or less immediate?
Yeah, that's also, it's a very interesting question. We have looked at that with our models as well. So we see that when we stop emissions today, we will stop, according to everything we know, surface warming of the air temperatures. And we will also stop near surface ocean deoxygenation very quickly. So in the upper mixed layer and upper thermocline, few hundred meters, in current models, deoxygenation there can be stopped. It cannot be stopped easily in the deep ocean, in the total ocean. So there we see a committed deoxygenation. So even if we stop emissions today, we will see deoxygenation in the models for centuries to come. And actually, we find that only 1/4 of the deoxygenation is realized by now. 3/4 are in the pipeline. And this mostly occurs in the deep ocean. It does not, in our models, lead to anoxia. But still, there's a severe oxygen loss in the deep ocean where we know very little about the ecosystems, so they will have additional oxygen stress. And there's very little we probably can do about that. That's a major environmental stressor or maybe damage that we have already committed that will now take place over the next centuries, similar to acidification, which also has this committed acidification of the deep ocean, and sea level rise, which will also continue according to what we know for centuries.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. It's not really a message of hope, but indeed it's a realistic one that yeah, it should also be important to highlight. Now the questions that we got. So first of all, from my colleague Ana Rodriguez, we are not able as organizers to put in the Q&A, but basically it's asking about the this macroalgae harvesting. So at what scale do we have to grow macroalgae in the ocean to achieve this positive impact shown in the graph? And then I will link it directly to the David Snyder's question. What will be the cost of harvesting all these macroalgae? And if would it be that's practical? So maybe you have an overview of.
So the scale is, well, it's about almost continental, half continental scale. So it's per square meter you can grow more macroalgae or harvest more carbon than you usually can do on land. So that's the ocean can be more productive if you have enough nutrients. So that's area-wise, you need less ocean area than you would need land area if you do biomass production on land and harvesting there for bioenergy, for example. But it's still it's a major. You would see it from space. You change ocean basin scale, basically ecosystems as well. The harvesting itself is, of course, a major operation as well, a major perturbation to the system. You harvest not only the macroalgae, you harvest everything that is in them. Usually, often these are really breeding grounds of ecosystem biodiversity hotspots. Fish they could escape, but the larvae stages maybe not. There's, of course, symbionts on the algae growing there. So you would harvest entire ecosystems. Of course, it's not, which we do on land as well. So harvesting is not as a clean operation as we try to think in our models. The costs of these are, it's more costly the further offshore you go. And well, we have macroalgae cultures for food production, for pharmaceutical production, for biomass, even chemical feedstock for chemical industry. So it is already done at pretty large scale in coastal waters. And so it's not impossible. Apparently, the market pays for it, and so biomass production is always expensive, no matter where you do it. Large scale, of course, you have to be aware in the ocean. It's interconnected globally. So if you introduce new species, you can have invasive species. If you have that has happened or is happening now in some parts of these macroalgae areas, that suddenly there are invasive species changing ecosystems all around, and you have to fight them. You need chemistry or mechanical measures to ensure that they don't take over the entire coast. And there are these ecological costs that are difficult to predict. There could also be, of course, viruses, diseases that could kill these macroalgae, and then you have another problem of rotting macroalgae on your coast, oxygen consumption, and so on. So, but therefore, it's very difficult to predict the costs of these. But there is industry, and apparently there's a market. So it looks as if that could be scaled up. And the question is, what are the governance schemes there? Could we just allow the country to do it in the national waters? But in the end, it might affect neighboring countries, might affect the open ocean, might affect the global ecosystem. And so there are thoughts. It's also now discussed in the London Convention, London Protocol perspective. How do we govern this? And when is it research? When is it a field experiment? When is commercial deployment? There are some boundaries are often not that easy to define. But
Yep.
yeah, there will be winners and losers. And of course, there are external costs as well as with many industries. So who pays for the damages? And this might be different from the one who earns the profits from selling the product. And we need governance for that.
Yep, indeed. And it's also asking the next question by Sheila, because the same issue. If the models are not predicting the big decline we see already, can there still be anoxia in the future, even if the models do not predict it? And also a follow-up question, have they figured out yet why the models are under predicting the oxygenation?
Yes, so if we know current models underestimate deoxygenation, current deoxygenation by factor 2 to 3. If we extrapolate that into the future, then we would run into some anoxic regions in the global ocean already by the committed deoxygenation, even if we stop emissions today. So that is reason to worry about. We will not see anoxic oceans. And also we see that after a couple of centuries that even can recover, and the future warmer ocean might hold more oxygen. So there are other surprises down the line, but for the next, well, I don't expect major mass extinction events that Earth has experienced in the past, but major changes in ecosystems, of course, and major stresses to current ecosystems, and particularly the deep ocean ecosystems, which we are least about and which often have long generation times. So they are maybe more vulnerable than the highly productive, fast turnover systems near the surface. The reasons of this discrepancy is not, we haven't been able to to fully pin down. I think it's physics. The models are too sluggish. They're too diffusive, so they are not responsive enough, particularly in the deep ocean, deep water formation, changes in deep ocean circulation. And we are exploring this now with a couple of projects, different models, different ideas. And there we are really glad that we have so many oxygen data. Never enough data, but we have this historical data, and we really also need more data, particularly in the high latitudes, deep water formation areas. Any transient tracers like CFC, Argon 39, abiotic transient tracers would be very helpful to have to see these changes in circulation and deep ocean ventilation, particularly. This is, our best guess right now that current models underestimate, are not sensitive enough. Of course, this has implications for other, like for heat uptake, for carbon uptake, and it's worrying that we underestimate the speed of change. Yeah.
Yeah, and really interesting. And it's also, you were also highlighting a little bit the impacts on the marine ecosystems, and also that's a question from Sumaya Yuri. So then, of course, highlighted that marine CDR will also change the ocean pH, leading to ocean acidification, which can also be detrimental to marine life. And do you know if that effect has been also tested in the models? And of course, the general question, right, if there are studies on the biochemical methods of marine CDR impacts on marine life.
Yes. Yeah, we have tested, we have looked at the carbon chemistry. So we see, well, the biotic methods, whenever there's respiration, it produces CO2. And usually we have then enhanced acidification in the deep ocean or wherever the respiration is located. We usually have less intense acidification in the surface ocean because there's less CO2 in the atmosphere, so less acidification from the top. So we shift the patterns of acidification. But overall, there's more CO2 in the ocean. That was the intention. We remove it from the atmosphere into the ocean. And so that comes at the cost of acidification for the biotic methods, or for the biotic methods with respiration. For geochemical methods, we do not enhance acidification, so that's especially in utilization of carbonic acid. So their acidification is slightly reduced because of less CO2 in the atmosphere, and the buffer capacity is increased of the ocean. So that's geochemical methods do not impose additional stress, acidification stress.
Okay, good to know. And maybe I have the two last questions. One is also from our colleague Lily Bucha. She's asking like why doxo direct ocean carbon capture and storage was not included in the study, and will it also be similar or behave similar to ocean alkalinity enhancement?
Right. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes, it would. Yeah, we haven't included it here. It would behave in our model very similar to alkalinity enhancement. There are small changes because of the nonlinearity of the carbonate chemistry. So removing DRC is a little bit different than adding alkalinity. But overall, in oxygen changes, it's almost identical. So we would see the same curves on this scale. It wouldn't make a difference. It would make a difference in the ecology, which is not resolved in these models, because you would have to process a lot of water for the direct ocean carbon removal. And basically, for a petagram removal of DRC from the ocean, you would have to process the upper meter of the North Atlantic or so and move it. And it has to be the upper meter because it has to be in contact with the atmosphere. And so then you have to think, what do we do with the ecosystem there? And do you produce a lot of, if you go through filtration, you still may break a lot of microbes. So everything that goes through the machine, through the reactor, will not survive. That's, well, at least our assumption. So you produce likely a lot of organic waste, which then can be respired, can lead to oxygen consumption. And therefore, we were very uncertain of how this is produced or processed in these chemical reactors or that remove the CO2 from the ocean water. They all work with, or those I know, work with the acid-base swing, so they kill, they have lots of 4 or something inside. And even filtration would first add costs, of course, huge costs, but it's unlikely to be perfect. So it will likely crush some of the microbes or organisms and produce additional dissolved organic carbon, dissolved organic matter, which is usually very tasty, will be respired and leads to oxygen changes. So it's not as clean as it again looks on paper or in models, but we're not too sure about these environmental consequences, particularly of these processing plants, that the filtration and the huge throughput of water.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe the last question that I will also tag, another question that I had is from Larissa Lorenzi. What type of observations will be the most urgent and important to have? And also any regional component, what will be the next critical research gap? And also the question that I want to tag on is that you mentioned that the observing oxygen is quite cheap and easy. And is there possibilities to also tag oxygen into current carbon observations, or that's something that's still, that maybe the instruments are not similar or not really easy to tag any oxygen observations there?
No, they should be tagged coupled to all measurements we do. And we have these towed systems. So they're usually for all instruments that you put into the water for a short time. I think it's straightforward to do so. So it's not very expensive. And it's usually done already, at least on research vessels, on many monitoring systems, on commercial vessels as well. So I think that's, has to be done. And we, for the data systems, like we have GLODAP, we have systems for CO2 and at SOCAT for CO2 databases. We now develop as part of the Global Ocean Oxygen Decade program, the GLODAT, the Global Ocean Atlas and Database. So a product, particularly with quality control, is essential. And if we want to have time resolution as well, we have to process that very carefully. But there's a product in development for oxygen, Global Atlas of Oxygen and Oxygen Change. There we need high quality data, which often means just the right, all the flags have to be communicated as well, not just the measurement value, but which instrument and method and all that. It's standard procedures, but they have to be taken. And there's a huge amount of oxygen data that we cannot access right now. That's the main problem. In most coastal areas, many countries do not report oxygen data because, of course, there you see every accident from a chemical plant or wastewater treatment plant. It's immediately seen in the oxygen because there's additional respiration usually. And therefore, many communities do not like to publish oxygen data so much. And there we have to make an effort. And that's also part of my motivation for this Oxygen Decade program, that via the UN Decade, we can have a little bit more incentives to distribute, to open up the databases that we have, many countries have, and really participate in this global effort to better understand oxygen change. And we need it everywhere, in coastal areas, in the high latitudes, in the deep water formation areas. So every single measurement is of value. And in coastal areas, also another issue is we should measure at night as well, where respiration continues, where we don't have the photosynthesis, but we see the oxygen decline. So the diel cycle is also something we have to pay more attention to, I think, than we have done traditionally.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think, fortunately, our time is up. But I would like to thank you very much, Andreas. So also for all of you who participated in this webinar, please save the date for next month, 16th of April, where we will have Kelsey Roberts presenting one of the a new paper on the potential impacts on climate interventions on marine ecosystems. So it's also really related to the presentation that we have today from Andreas, but as for next month, it's also just to let you know that will start at 2 o'clock, because yeah, she's from the west side of the US. But otherwise, thank you very much, Andreas. It was really interesting, and yeah, hopefully you enjoyed as well. And for all of you participating online, thank you very much, and see you.